thanks for coming here. No, we have between us Andreas Loeschel. He is one of the most specialists in the environmental and energy policies in Europe. He is the assessor of the different departments in the European Commission or in Germany governments, no, at regional and stattal levels. No. Thanks for participating in this interactive event. The topic that we explain during this session is very, very relevant, especially in this context where the war in Ukraine and the crisis in the provision of different driver of energy is very, very important. And I think he explained a lot of his experience, no? And the topic is very interesting to generate open debate. No? Thanks for participating here, no? And we like to...
As the chair of ECO-SOS, just to thank Andreas for being here today. Is at the end of the academic year, and this is also the last edition of the ECO-SOS talk this academic year. So we hope that for next season to have as well this variety of topic speakers and geographical origin in order to provide very nice academic discussions. But with this idea of having this broad approach and trying to discuss a little bit and to try to exchange opinions. So Andreas, thank you again.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks both of you, the institutions, for inviting me to be here in Reos. I've not been here, which obviously is unforgivable, but I'm going to catch up this afternoon, and I'm very curious, and it's a pleasure to be here and visit your university. When we discussed a bit about the topic, I thought it might be interesting to look a bit on energy policy issues in a broader sense. Then again, of course, I'm not an expert on Catalonian energy policy, even though I noticed it's very different from the German ones, obviously. But I thought it's probably good now to give a little bit a broader perspective on some of the issues. And I've prepared some slides, and I think my idea was to present some of these slides and later on engage in some of these discussions. You know? I don't know whether I should be sitting here or should move.
If you prefer, you have the point.
So here you can see. You can see it. I have it here, so I even can keep sitting if it is not annoying. I'm also can do some training and stand. But okay, so and I thought the starting point might be a paper that we have been writing actually this year, where we try to do a little stock take of the recent energy crisis, and that was published as an econ policy report, and this was joint work with people from different states, countries. Frédéric Renard from Paris, Pedro Linares, who's a professor in Madrid, at Comillas, an excellent energy economist, David Newbury from Cambridge, Karin Pittel from Munich, and Julio Saavedra also from Munich, and Georg Zachmann from Bruegel, which is a think tank in Brussels. Okay? And so I thought this is probably a good way to start and give you, let's say, 20 minutes or so, a bit an overview of some of the thoughts that we have developed. And as I said, I'm also a bit familiar with European policy, but I'm in principle following very closely the Energiewende in Deutschland, in Germany, the energy transition, and so therefore I'm also going to use some examples from Germany, and then we can discuss what that all implies. So, well, I would like to start first with in this paper, and you have reference of this paper. So if you want to read a bit more, you can go there and look more onto the text in detail. what we were first interested about is what was the situation and what was the responses to the energy crisis in 2022. There we have seen that actually the measures to ameliorate the impacts of the energy crisis have been very different in different regions, in different member states in Europe. But you can also see that there are some foci of these responses, and I'm showing this here to you. So this is focusing a lot on affordability issues, less on energy security issues. If you look at interventions, it's looking a lot on the electricity sector, interestingly. Also to the gas sector, or a combination of both. So it's really an energy intervention in most cases, not so much looking at other sectors. And many of these measures are actually short-term measures. I will also describe some of the long-term arrangements, but most of these interventions, they have been short-term interventions. Some of them actually have stayed. So even now, when we consider that this crisis is over, it's still, some of these measures are there, and some are good. Others are probably problematic, because they were developed out of a different setup, which was a short-term perspective on the crisis. And as you can see here, also there are some different foci on what people want to achieve. As said, mostly on direct support for consumers. Most of the measures actually in Europe, they were direct support measures. There are also some measures that then look at energy savings, at gas substitution, at interventions in the wholesale markets to a lower extent. But in principle, most of these are about affordability, for consumers. And with this combination of measures, in more or less, we succeeded to diversify away from Russian gas in the European Union. And you can see that the Russian gas is practically fully substituted with other sources. This is not true for all the countries. So, for example, in Austria and other places, there are still substantial parts of the energy supply coming from Russia. But this is also likely to stop relatively soon. As you know, some of these treaties on the supply of gas from Russia to these areas are actually going to be terminated next year, and so probably this is also going to stop. So even a small fraction of Russian gas that's still arriving in Europe might be gone next year. And this has been substituted.
Can I interrupt you for a quick question? So this diversification away from the Russian gas started already before the war in Europe, well before, right?
Yeah.
It then intensified that, I guess,
yes.
after that.
I mean, the issue was that Russia reduced its delivery to Europe already before, so they had to diversify already. And that started in 2021. Actually in the mid of 2021, Russia started not to deliver gas full extent, which is actually interesting because that was at that time I spent a year in the Krupp-Wissenschaftskolleg in Greifswald within the Baltic Sea, and that's actually where Nord Stream 1 is arriving to Germany. And so since I was there in this Institute of Advanced Studies, I started to give press statements because people were asking, what happens here? Gas prices go up substantially. What happens? We don't see anything on the ground. So it's not clear why gas is actually reduced, gas supply is reduced. For now, afterwards, of course, we knew that this was already strategy of Russia, which started to reduce the delivery, but as well they emptied the German storage sites. No, a lot of the Russian gas is stored, in Germany in big gas storage sites, and for some reason this was owned by Russian companies, and so they not only reduced the delivery, they also emptied their storage. They didn't refill, let's say, because they didn't refill properly their storage sites, and this already was visible on the markets at that time because gas prices went up because of these developments, and that led already to some restructuring in the energy suppliers even before the invasion. Okay, and this was building up then with the increased tensions, of course, of Russia concentrating troops, all the verbal things that ramped up in winter. And actually, we already talked about a crisis situation in winter, more or less, because we have not seen that on the gas market for a long time. And I think 2 weeks before the invasion, I gave an interview to The Guardian, and I said, Russia is no longer a reliable supplier for Germany because of exactly what we have seen before. So of course then came the invasion, but even without the invasion, I think we would have to revisit, let's say, the relationship with Russia, because that was something that has not happened for a long time on these markets. Okay, then came the invasion. And that was, of course, something.
So just one short clarification question. You said so from that moment you arrived to the conclusion that Russia was not a reliable supplier.
Yeah.
So does it mean that it was a reliable supplier before?
Yes, it was. So the whole. I mean, now I'm talking a bit about the German energy strategy. German energy strategy was framed by a quote. Wandel durch Handel, so transformation through trade. Okay, so the idea was that, I mean, if you have this trading relationship, you can actually, even cooperate with these communist countries, even in the times of Cold War. So even in the times of Cold War, the contracts have always been followed.
Okay.
So there was no breaching of contracts, even in the densest situation of the Cold War. So in Germany, people thought that whatever will happen, this is going to be a constant, stable supply. And therefore, we observe that this is different. This is different. And then, of course, there was some talk about, there was this accident in Russia in one of these gas pipelines, but this could not really explain what we've seen on the larger scale. Okay, and so therefore we were already alarmed, and we already talked in winter 2021 about this specific situation, and then came the invasion, and that was of course a totally new situation, very difficult to handle. And then since we already thought a lot about this beforehand. On the day of the invasion, we gathered a group of people that were in this type of debates and wrote a paper on that. And this is the paper on the right-hand side. It was called "What if the economic effects of for Germany of a stop of the gas imports from Russia." Okay, and we published this a week later, and that used a macroeconomic model. Actually a nice model of Banerjee in order to look at the macroeconomic consequences of the stop of gas supply. And I was also part of this group because there was the question, what will be the gap if we don't get gas from Russia? And so what I did was actually trivial in a way. So we looked at, what are the pipeline facilities that we have, how much could we get from pipelines, what are the LNG facilities we have in Europe, how much could we get from additional LNG deliveries, what is there from storage, and as I already told you, the storage sites were emptied by the Russian companies, so not a lot to expect from there. But we have this LNG possibility. Now we have this possibility of filling better pipeline systems that we have. And then what's the rest? Now what has to come on the right-hand side as a supply shock and be covered by reductions in demand. And I calculated about 1/3, more or less. It has to be covered in order to rebalance the markets. And then we calculated what would this shock mean for the macroeconomy situation in Germany. And we came up with a number that said, well, this is in the ballpark of the corona pandemic. Okay, so this is something that is bad, but this is not something that is going to destroy our economy in a way. We are going to be able to handle it. And this caused a lot of trouble in Germany, including our chancellor going to Prime TV and saying, because he was asked about this, and he said, these are just some economists that are putting together some models, and in the end, this never works. Okay, because that put a lot of pressure, of course, for the German government, because we never said they should cut gas supply, but some people in the political arena, they said, oh, see, this is something that is manageable somehow. Why don't you be hard on Russia in this situation? Because Russia getting a lot of money to finance this war through the receipts from oil, gas, and coal delivery. In Germany, 55% of gas was coming from Russia. 60% of coal was coming from Russia, and also I think 45% of oil was coming from Russia. Okay, with oil and coal, that's not a problem because these are international market. We can easily substitute. But with gas, it was a problem because we are bound to infrastructure, and this is the pipelines and the LNGs. And for some reason, I will talk about that. Germany has not built LNG terminals, not like Spain, for example, where you have a very large structure of liquefied natural gas terminals that can deliver gas on the global market. Germany does not have this. Okay, so we were much more prone to this type of shocks. And so, so this was this paper. As I said, a lot of controversy about the paper, but in the end, we still believe that we were right somehow. And in the paper, we also developed some strategies or made some proposals how to deal with the situation, because the issue is how can you bring down demand by 30% in a way that does not involve major disruptions. Okay. And as economists, of course, you would say, well, okay, to do that, you, as I said, you use all these other possibilities. So here, I just show you what I just said, filling up the pipelines. So we shifted and we got much more gas from Norway, for example, through the German-Norway pipelines. We got more gas from the Netherlands through these pipeline systems. So we tried to substitute pipeline gas from other sources. And we built new infrastructure relatively quickly. We built new liquefied natural gas stations in Germany, in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea. And they are now operating. They were operational 1 year after the invasion, so not available for the first winter, but for the second winter. Okay, so that was one part of the story. The second part was, well, in order to bring down demand, you would think that prices should reflect this new situation. And so the German way to handle it, different from, for example, the Spanish way, was to try to keep the price signal intact in a way. Let these high gas prices be reflected for households and industry, and think about a situation where you can afterwards, let's say, accommodate the distributional consequences of these high gas prices. Okay, so the German idea was keep the price signal, prices go up substantially, okay, and then give money as a lump sum to individuals. So we set up a gas commission, and the gas commission then makes a proposal to give a lump sum payment of 80% of your last year's consumption, new price versus a reference price, 12 cents at this point in time, as a lump sum payment to all the different households and to the industry, which means from an economic perspective, saving energy is one of the prime concerns. And of course people say, well, this is all not possible. So, when we published the paper, they said, this is all rubbish, because from technology we know it's not possible to save more than 7-8% in industry. It's not possible. Okay? And in the end, of course, savings were much larger. Savings were in the ballpark of 20 to 30%. And some of these savings were very costly. So, for example, you had a reshuffling of the value chains in chemical sector. So we stopped producing ammonia in Germany, but we started to import that from the US. Okay, so this is an indirect import of gas, no? Because this is embedded in the ammonia. We don't produce it anymore in Germany because that's too costly with these high gas prices. But of course, these are possibilities to cope with it. As I said, this is probably bad for the German industry because we have a reshuffling of these value chains, but it helps us, of course, a lot in these countries. Plus, with also savings by households, savings, energy efficiency, investments by industries, and overall, the reduction were much higher than actually thought, from a purely technology-based type of analysis. So in the end, as said, up to 30% in some of these months, which led to a situation where we managed, without any larger disruptions, to cope with this situation. And of course, a plea for letting markets work. Then again, of course, that's only possible if you have big pockets, okay? Because otherwise, you cannot work on these distributional effects. And so other countries in Europe, they have chosen other ways to cope with it. They go directly on the markets, trying to keep the prices low on the markets. Like, for example, in Spain, then of course you're interfering in the markets. You don't have to, let's say, rebalance the market outcomes, the market allocations, and that might be preferential if you are in a different budgetary situation. In Germany, this was, from a budgetary side, this was not a problem because the German public deficits are relatively modest. So they used a lot of money for the Corona crisis, and they used a lot of money to cope with the energy crisis. And this is of course now an issue, but at that time it was not an issue. Okay, so that's just one message I wanted to send, because it's also been then reflected in some of the recommendations. Then last point I would like to make. Well, this is a gas crisis. But of course, it is affecting also the electricity sector because gas is very often the marginal technology. So high gas prices are reflected usually in high electricity prices because of this. Because we have markets where marginal technology set prices. If the marginal technology is getting much more expensive, that's what's happening, and that's good, in a way, because it shows that on the margin you have a problem with satisfying demand, and so it's expensive, brings down demand. On the energy or in the electricity sector, let's say there was less activity in the end, and that's good because at the very beginning there was a lot of discussion to also intervene much more on the electricity sector. And 2 years ago, I still remember the German head of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She said, the electricity market is not fit for purpose because it's delivering these high prices on the electricity, and there are some problems in the market design. It's not fit for purpose. And we were a bit puzzled because we said, oh, we think actually it's very well fit for purpose because it's helping us through this crisis, because we have a problem. These things are very costly. We have to bring down demand, and we do that via this pricing system. So we think it's fit for purpose, and without the European market, actually, this would have been a disaster. No? And then, of course, in Spain, that has been seen different, but there are different perspectives on that. I mean, Germany is not Spain. So you have different situation. You could cope with it. You have all these LNG terminals and different situation. In our case, I mean, we wouldn't have had any chance if this demand destruction would not have happened, because we don't have other infrastructure. This would have meant that if we would have kept electricity prices low, gas prices low, then we would have to starting with a planned outage of demand, brownouts and blackouts. No other possibility in the German situation. So therefore, we thought this is also something that, let's say, we can take home as some of the insights of these crises. That first, of course, energy security starts to enter the picture. We have not talked a lot about that, even though, of course, economists have always said that energy security is also an externality. I mean, it's like climate change. It's an externality. It's a public good in a way. With energy security, all the companies, the individuals, I mean, they go for the cheapest option. But the cheapest option, gas from Russia, is probably socially not the best options to choose. Okay, and if nobody is looking at that, then you're moving into this type of dependencies that are not healthy for the economy. And some of the lessons then is, okay, probably you have to admit that this is an externality, which means you might need some interventions. It might cost more than the least cost solution, and you have to reconsider some of these older policies. For example, not having LNG terminals, because LNG terminal is a costly option, costs more than just getting pipeline gas, but it's a security against these type of disruptions. Okay, and that should have been clear always, but it was not in the political sense. So even today, people are complaining your LNG terminals are only used half. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is, if we have a major disruption of the Norway-German pipeline, then we have a big problem. And if that happens, we need to have a fallback solution. Okay, and that is then the new infrastructure, which hopefully we are not using, because this thing is not happening, but it's not ruled out. It's not ruled out in the current situation. And so a lot of things have changed here also in the way people are thinking about energy security. Okay. Then I said another lesson for us was, well, this distortionary policy might not be good. And you have to think about how you even strengthen the markets in order to cope with these situations. Okay, of course, then you have to think about how can you rebalance, okay, these impacts, but be careful with too much distortionary policies. I give you one more example. I said some of these regulations, they have stayed. And one of the things that were initiated were these idea of clawbacks for renewable electricity. Okay, so so you have these very high prices, and of course they provide a lot of profits for renewables. And then policymakers said, "Oh, this is not acceptable. We have to take this money away." And I was I was not in favor of this idea. Why? Because, well, in the end, it turned out it's very difficult to collect extra profits, extremely difficult. So in the end, they collected practically nothing. But what they did is they intervened massively in the market, okay, which now, of course, and this stays, these clawback clauses stay also now. Now it's clear that there's always a possibility for the regulator to intervene in this market. Okay, and now we said okay, 18 cents is acceptable, but who says that this stays at 18 cents and not the next commission comes up with 10 cents or 9 cents or 8 cents? No, I mean, what's acceptable? And that's of course generating a lot of uncertainty now for investors in these markets, because then it's simply not clear. You're investing over horizons of 20 to 30 years, how your future situation is looking like, which means that you're putting a lot of danger or unsecurity in these investments, and these investments then are not happening. Okay, they only happened under some type of subsidization scheme, because people do not trust any longer in the revenue of the markets. And that's a big problem for the renewables. By the way, it's also a problem more generally for electricity markets, because for investments in capacities, investors have to be sure that there will be times where they get a lot of money out of these markets, because in the future, with all these renewable systems, the conventional power plants are not going to operate for very long times. They are going to operate for very little hours, but in these hours they really have to make a lot of money. Otherwise, these investments are not valuable. Okay, they're not going to do. And then, and given also all these interventions, for example, we are in a situation where in Germany now we are going to install capacity markets, which is a direct consequence of investors not trusting in revenues out of the markets for coming from very high prices. And the same, of course, for the renewables. People want to have a safety value net for their investments. We were also not very, let's say, successful in letting the renewables entering the markets without some type of governmental support. Okay. So I think that is also one of the lessons. I think the other thing I wanted to mention, and then we go probably in the discussion, are the idea of policy coordinations. I already talked a bit about that. Actually, we made the proposal that you establish some type of foresight office, but you also increase cooperation between member states, because that has not worked out very well. I mean, in some of these, if you do a stock take of these things, there have been some cooperative agreements on, for example, concerted renewable auctions, on concerted pricing of reliability options in the market, or on common designs for support systems, but most of this disappeared again. Okay, so this was only temporarily, while actually we know that, for example, in terms of renewables, we have a lot of renewables on the European level. In the north, wind and hydropower. In the south, we have sun. So there's a lot of renewables. So looking at this problem in a concerted way can have a lot of benefits. But we are looking at this from a member state perspective. So Germany is setting immense targets now for renewables, 420 gigawatts of renewables by 2035. Our peak demand is 80 gigawatt. So we are going to have 5 times or 6 times our peak demand installed in renewables after governmental plans. So that's a lot. And that's of course not using, let's say, the cost efficient potentials they are on the European scale. Okay, so we need more policy coordination. As I said, we have also some things that went well. Like for example, there were very little border closures even in this time of crisis. So even though some of the member states were better off, others were worse off in the situation, there were relatively little closures of markets. Still there were some. There were not so much direct energy subsidies. There were some, okay, where you directly subsidize expensive gas and electricity, which from an economic point of view is, as I said, bad because it's actually incentivizing what you don't want, incentivizing demand. And there was also maintenance of, for example, carbon pricing in most of these events. So there was some pressure on carbon price as well, but in many of member states this was not followed. In Germany they postponed a bit the price escalators, and that was bad, but in more or less it stayed there. As I said, there were some new coordination and information fora that emerged, which was okay. I talked about that, but many of them were not continued over the crisis. And then, as I said, many things went wrong. I talked already about that. So we were not, let's say, prepared for these major disruptions. Okay, so thinking in these unexpected events was not really common, and we were more or less unprepared for this situation. As I said, the paper that we wrote the week after the invasion was actually the first paper that tried to tackle this situation somehow. Okay, and there was no preparedness, so I was in many emergency discussions, because also policymakers were totally unaware of how energy markets work, okay, how electricity markets work, how oil markets work, how gas and coal markets work. So we're really unprepared on the policy side on these things. And then even they made some bad decisions. So in Germany, they closed nuclear in the times of the crisis, with 3 nuclear reactors still operating that were closed down in the second winter. You say, well, probably bad signal for everybody. I mean, how can you ask others to step away a bit from their policy agendas if you just follow up on these decisions? They closed the Groningen gas field. Netherlands closed down Groningen because of national security problems with the gas field. So you've seen that there were some bad decisions where national policy trumped this European scale emergency. And what ESPA came out is that we have very little data on these things. So the granular data in terms of energy demand, energy supply, prices, flows was broadly missing. Okay, and this made it very difficult to design response options. Like in Germany, for example, when we try to design these packages to support industry and businesses, this was a disaster, because nobody knew really, okay, what is the impact on a household and how necessary it is to support this household. Because nobody, in the best of all cases, you see the demand. Not even that is clear sometimes, because you only see it with a very long time lag. But you have no information about the situation of the household. If this is a family, or if this is a villa of a rich person, that is just using gas a lot, with a lot of possibilities to reduce this, and also no need of, let's say, big support schemes compared to a a large family, you know, that is living in a very different situation. So this is really a problem which hindered us to do good responses because we didn't have the information, also not the really good models to cope with this, and therefore, you know, academia and all this type of stuff was a bit underutilized, I would say. No, we had problems coming up with really good tailored solution, and partly it was because of this missing capacity in terms of data and understanding on how this. Okay, so probably here I stop. I have many more slides prepared, but I think we also wanted to discuss a bit, and probably I can also go to some of the slides in the discussion. But okay, thanks for following me. I'm looking forward to some more discussion.
Aproximar-ho després. Aproximar-ho, però després. Is there open the question?
So then what's next? So according to all this scenario, all these lessons from this, let's say, complicated year, so whether we are prepared to go further into this direction and to this kind of, this idea that we had more or less the same with the pandemic, this idea that some activities in industries were strategic and we had offshored a lot many other countries, and then we discovered very quickly that we needed that, and it was not possible to bring back all these products that, like medicines, for instance. Yeah. So whether we are, I think that it seems clear that we are, let's say, better prepared than 2 years ago. But whether that's really true, or there is a lot of, let's say, heterogeneities at country level, different interests, as you said. Austria is more dependent on Russian gas even now, so is there a real coordination right now? Or no?
Yeah. Okay, so I would guess that what we are going to see also in the future. I mean, now I think we have coped with this, let's say, short-term impact of the crisis. Okay, and that I've described. But of course, there's a long-term impact, and the long-term impact is, for me at least, is that energy prices are going to stay high on average over the foreseeable future, I would say. Okay, and that has consequences. So, for example, in Germany, I don't think that we are going to see the levels of electricity prices that we've seen before. Okay, we are going to see costlier electricity, and via the EU emissions trading, we also will see costlier gas prices. And that means that some of these things are going to develop further, and you're going to see not only these emergency changes over the last 2 years, but many of these things are going to stay also. So we already observed in the last 2 years German electricity demand being down by about 10%. Really big structural change. So some of this industry might not come back. Okay, and if this is continued, you will see that the structural change is also going to take up or will be taken up in other sectors. Okay, so this is something that we are going to face, and for me that means that okay, we have to confront this somehow in terms of policy making, but we also, I think, have to look a bit better on the European level, because many of these things are also in terms of resilience, they can be managed on a European level. So for example, I was okay, we are all recording this, but that's okay. So I was very much against a lot of the subsidies the German government paid for the steel industry. Okay, because I think there are better places in Europe to produce steel, and this is something that you can actually, you don't have to have necessarily at home. I mean, you can argue whether it makes sense to have some steel production, which is very specialized, also at home. But in principle, I think there are a lot of opportunities to think about these type of problems on a European scale. Okay, and I think we should move a little bit more into this direction, which will happen anyways if governments are not subsidizing against it. No, I mean, Germany is now giving a lot of money, for example, to turn its steel plants into direct hydrogen plants in order to cope with these climate neutrality claims. But this all has to be subsidized heavily. And this is, of course, on the other hand, working against other possibilities, no, like producing steel in the north of Sweden or whatever, no, or in Spain, or I don't know. I mean, other places where energy is cheap, no, and there is iron ore, and you can do that actually, no, and then tackle it from a European perspective. So I think we need a bit. I mean, we need a bit more of that. So let's say look at the problem on the European scale, because we are going to face these global challenges. I mean, there are some places in Europe that have cheap energy, but Germany is not one of them, and we have to confront this on a European scale somehow. And there we are not at the moment. This is a discussion. As you said, you talked about strategic industries, for example. I mean, we are not talking about that because that is politically very, very difficult. So policymakers don't want to do that, but actually, I mean, from an academic point of view, you should do that. You should talk about that. No, I mean, what are the things that you really need at home? Yeah, and then what not? And I think if you are honest, you will see that there are many things you not necessarily need at home. It's unpleasant. I mean, we've been here at the chemical industry. I mean, that's always impressive, no? Going to a chemical plant, because over 200 of years, they have optimized, of course, the full value streams, no, of these things. No? So they, I mean, if you look at the diagrams, the flow diagrams, it's amazing, no? But in the end, of course, you can do that also totally different. You can do that much simpler. You can do it without oil, but it will mean that you have to reformulate the whole industry. And of course, they don't want to do that. But in the end, this might be a necessity if the energy prices are like that. And then you're moving more into hydrogen, into synthetic fuels to cope with the climate crisis. Then you have to think about how are you building up these new markets, learning from the example. So hydrogen, for example, I mean, that's a market starting from scratch. But there are some countries that are in a very good position. And these are probably not the ones we would like to have as trading partners, no? Because all the traditional owners of coal, oil and gas, I mean, they have the sun, they have the money to invest. Okay, so they are in a very good position to also start getting a larger share on this new market, and they are doing that. They're investing in renewables in Saudi Arabia, and they are building up electrolyzer capacities, and this is all about writing down the cost functions. No? So if you are not actively working against that, you might end up in a very similar situation than before, being again now depending on hydrogen from these places. No? And so therefore, my learning would be also in terms of the global markets, you have to think about how not to run into the same type of market structures. The situation is much better there. You have a lot of, in Europe, you have a lot of possibilities, but you have to actively develop it. Otherwise, you will have path dependence.
Yeah, I have a question about this point. We talk about the renewables and green projects, and I have a specific question. Where so there are many friends that are engaged in these green projects, and you see that from data, these are expensive projects, and this is something actually priced at the market. So markets value this project high. So in fact, there's a premium here for these, for the for the firms that are engaged in this project.
Yeah.
So, which means that, what does this mean? And how should we go about, subsidizing these projects? There's also another hypothesis that basically investors don't really believe that the project is very green, so that's why they put a premium. But what is your take on that, on this?
Okay, first, the German government has set up a platform to discuss all these type of issues. For example, how can we get access to cheap renewable electricity in the future? Okay, and I'm chairing the German Energy Transition Expert Committee. So we were writing a paper, like a topical paper, on these different aspects. And one of the things we discussed was how can we get cheap access to renewables for companies and individuals and households. Because that is strange in a way. As you said, of course, this is all valued at market prices. Why should you, as an investor, sell your electricity below market prices? No. So if the electricity price is high, of course the project will be expensive. Okay, and so you have to think about possibilities. I think, that you can allow individuals, allow companies to make use of these low costs of renewables in a way. How can you do that? Well, first, there are a lot of non-market constraints of these type of investments. So in Germany, and I guess also here, it's a lot about land availability. So in Germany, for example, the land that is available for these investments is really very small. Okay, so in the past, local governments, communities have just were not willing to give these certificates or the possibilities to build projects. Now that means, of course, that the number of possibilities is very small, and so this hinders local companies, for example, to engage directly in these type of projects, because there's simply no opportunities for that. So I would say in Germany we have pushed a lot for making, because that's also not in my backyard problem. Okay, so of course the government, the lender, they want this. The communities don't want that. So you have really very strange situations where, we had just a negative voting of a community of a large wind park that was next to one of the biggest chemical plants in Bavaria. Now Bavaria is in the south of Germany. They have relatively bad capacities for renewables, so they have to import all their renewables. So having a large wind park in front of the chemical plant would have been, let's say, a major improvement for the situation, because that would allow them to use this electricity for production. They were against it. Okay, so so possibilities for investments is very crucial, and you have to overcome. In Germany, we now put quotas on the lender. We said, okay, we need 2% of our land for renewables. Okay, and now we put quotas on you, and you have to show us that you are fulfilling these numbers. And if you're not, then on a national level, then everything is allowed. You have no longer the possibility to intervene. Okay, so if somebody's coming and wants to build a wind farm, he can do it because you have shown that you're not willing, to cooperate in this. We'll see how this is working out, but this is the setup. Now, second thing, there is a lot of regulatory uncertainty. Because many of these wind farms, even if there is space, it's not clear, because there will be always court case against it, whether this will uphold. And the problem is that it's taking a long time. Other problem, takes 7 years, all these different steps. You need all these different things from in the process of building this plan. Totally unclear how this will end up, because policy might change, people might protest against it. So how can you increase this certainty in your investments? And there, for example, in Germany, we have implemented a rule that says if there are trade-offs between environmental protection and climate is going to win. Okay? Environment concerns are important, but not on a local level. So if you have a specific species that is there, this will be only followed up if there is a national level problem in extinction of these species. If this is only a local problem, it's not going to prevent this. Okay? So quicker and more robust processes. And the last thing is many of the companies, they would sometimes involve in this type of investments, but these are long-term investments, 10 years plus, and they cannot do that. Risks are too big. If you are medium-sized companies, you cannot do it. BASF can do that. They just bought a large wind park in the North Sea. Okay, so for them it's easy, but for the smaller companies, so it's about how can you reduce these risks. And so what we proposed is that government is taking up some of these investment risks, for these smaller companies, so that they can sign off these long-term contracts to build a wind power plant next to the site, even though this means a commitment of 10-15 years with risks that this is not happening, there's some fallout or whatever, and then I think government has to say. So there's I think a combination of different means that is, let's say, addressing some of the problems, because in the end, and that's what you said, many of the firms, they would be willing to pay a premium also, because they know that over the long run this is something that is important for them, but at the moment there are too little opportunities, or they are prone with too much risks in order to develop this more on their own.
Well, this kind of policies here would be absolutely impossible to implement, because there is a very strong resistance in terms of implementing some wind farms, for instance, in some areas which are protected. And this is very, sometimes it's crazy, because even those associations who are supporting all these, let's say, policies ours, in order to modulate climate change, and are the ones who are, let's say, blocking a lot of investments because of very particular, very specific, and very local impact in some areas. Yeah. But here, accepting this kind of, let's say, priorities would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah, we will see how this is working out. I just said, let's say, from the national level, we have made the provision, that at least the legal system is going to look differently on it, because before also, this all goes to courts, and the courts usually then ruled against the renewable project. Now they can also rule against it, but let's say these trade-offs are now changed a bit away from these very super local impacts, towards a more broader perspective on the interventions in the environmental protection. Okay. Then I think, of course, if you have these huge protests, even if this is legally possible, you might probably not do it as a company. And there we try to, let's say, supplement this with other opportunities. So, for example, in Germany now, most of the Länder, they have some provision on how to involve local communities in these type of projects. And that is very different. So that could range from you have to allow some investment opportunity of the local communities, share 20% of the investment budget has to come, from local investors or from individuals or whatever. So they are part of the gains that are generated. There are also other mechanisms: reduced electricity prices, free entry into your bath or whatever. So there are many opportunities, and now there is also a law that makes the requirement of these investors to give part of the revenues to local communities. So there are different ways where there is the policy tries to bring the benefits also to the local communities. And for example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, where my university is sitting, we have just opened. There's just a new law that is doing exactly this, but it allows a lot of flexibility. It says, well, after a year or so, you have to find an agreement with the local communities. We don't dictate you how this should look like, but if you don't find an agreement, then we are going to move on, let's say, with a standardized procedure, let's say. So it's putting some pressure, also on the communities to find solutions, but it's not dictating. You can come up with everything, basically. And this has been installed just this year. So they set up a database on these agreements. So this is also, scientifically interesting, because what I would like to understand a bit better, what are things that help, what are models that help in finding solutions that are acceptable for both sides. But there's a large literature, of course, on that, and we should also learn from this literature. So we know that the resistance is usually much smaller afterwards than before. Okay, because resistance depends on how you integrate people in these planning processes. So there are a lot of things that you can do in order to lower this type of.
I have a question regarding the role of nuclear energy in this European market.
Yeah.
So in Germany, they have done the phase out. What was the impact of this on the energy prices? Do you have any estimation on this?
Yeah.
And then, France has large nuclear energy production market. So can you see what are the strategies for the future, and what is the impact of these different energy mixes?
Yeah.
For global warming, nuclear energy is good, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I've been writing the energy chapter for the Intergovernmental on Climate Change, the last assessment report. And so usually how this is done, you have 10 lead authors, and they write this chapter. As I said, I write the energy systems chapter. The coordinator in our group was from China, and the other from the US. And we have people from France. I was there from Germany. We have people also from Africa, from Asia. So you can imagine that the perspective on nuclear are very different in a way. So very different perspectives. But still, I think we all agreed that nuclear will not play a major role in the future energy systems. So in the scenarios of the IPCC, you usually can see that renewables pick up about 10% of the electricity generation globally in the longer run, given, let's say, the cost estimates for renewables and for nuclear power plants. Okay, so that can of course change, but for the time being, nuclear is a relatively costly technology to build. So if you want to build, nobody in Germany wants to build a new nuclear power plant, if this is not massively subsidized, and that's actually true for all the other new projects also. Of course, still this is done because governments look differently at these possibilities. But all these systems, new build nuclear, they are heavily subsidized. This is basically the government that's building it. If you look at Hinkley Point, Oulu in Finland, in France, Flamanville, very expensive. So you would not. I mean, then of course, why are they doing it? Well, first, there is potentially a hope that these costs are going down. I mean, you've probably followed the discussion of new designs for nuclear power. So who knows? Probably we are facing in 20 years a new situation, and you want to be in these discussions. At the moment, very difficult. I mean, I was as well in the working group of the European Academies of Sciences. We don't know. Could be. We don't know. Okay. So different perspective on technology development. I actually advise government at least to be still in this game because we don't know what's happening. Okay, and you should follow this closely because it can change. At the moment, most people don't see this on a large scale. It can change. Then, of course, you have the dual use issue and nuclear proliferation. So these are, of course, all countries that have nuclear weapons, like the UK, US, China. So they look different on nuclear power, than we do. And actually, this is sometimes also quite clearly formulated in their programs, like in the UK, where they say, okay, we have these both ambitions, and this is benefiting one from the other. And so then, of course, cost is a bit second order in terms of these more security-based strategies. But okay, so cutting this a bit shorter. So at the moment, there is a new build is not an option. I think on the large scale, we will see some of this because electricity demand is also increasing. We see in Slovakia and other countries they make this decision. Extending lifetimes is different, so actually I wrote in 2009 for the German government a study that was commissioned for the long-term development of the German power market, and actually we advised government to extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants at that time, and we calculated that you would reduce the cost by about 10%. So electricity prices would be 10% lower than in the alternative scenarios. And this was published in 2009. And then, of course, it's a political decision, I mean, on the one hand, you close the power plants for security reasons or potential risks of failures. The problem of storage, long-term storage side, versus 10% reduction in the power prices. And at that time, the policy decided to close down nuclear. Okay. And I think that was a decision which is as well a bit difficult to assess economically because these are low risk, high impact events where net present value probably is also not right in a way, and we don't have really good instruments to make informed decisions. But it was always clear that this comes at extra cost. And of course, with these crises, these extra costs were very visible. Okay, and then people started to question again the phase out. But for me, I mean, I didn't really understand it because it was always clear that this comes at a cost, and the cost is high because it's plus 10% of your electricity price for 20 years. It's substantial in a way. But policy decided to stick to this phase-out plan, which to some extent, to be honest, I was not so against because at the time of the crisis we only had 3 reactors left, which means the impact of the 3 reactors was quite small anyways. Was not really a game changer in a way. But I mean, the big thing happened between 2009 and especially 2011 with Fukushima and 2022 when we had this renewed discussion. in between we phased out 20 nuclear reactors. Okay, and then the remaining 3, this was more again on the policy part, you know, how you want to see that, but it was gone. More or less,
Just 2 very, very short questions. Looking at the next figure, as you were also suggesting, and it's also following up the previous question. Do you have a view on the capacity of the system to accommodate increasing demand coming from electric vehicles, from the generalized use of electric vehicles in Germany and in Europe in general? This is the first one, and the second one, very brief. Do you have an idea about the Russian point of view of all this situation? Because as you were suggesting at the beginning, they were strategic in reducing the supply of gas, and how they did deal with that.
Okay, first question is about the issue of increased demand for electricity. And that is clear from, let's say, from all of these scenarios. You can see that the electricity demand is going to increase in the future. That is electromobility. That's also heat pumps, for example. Now in the building sector, that's electrification of many processes in industry. So, for example, BASF, the German chemical industry, they now are experimenting with an electric cracker. Okay, so this is something we thought is not possible because you need these high temperatures for cracking oil, the crude oil. But now this seems to be also at least a possibility to run this on electricity, which can then be green also if it is coming somehow from renewables. So we might see a lot of electrification, and that means electricity demand is going to increase over time. And the question is, can we accommodate this? And that has, the answer has, I think, 2 sides. The first is the infrastructure. So can we come up with the transmission and the distribution grids that is necessary for this type of electrification? And this is at the moment, I think, a really big challenge, also economically, because we are building out these electricity grids in order to accommodate these future demands. And in Germany alone, we estimate that this costs us around 250 billion in terms of grid costs. And this will be a huge burden on future population paying off these huge infrastructure necessities. But in principle, that's possible. It's something just costly. No? The other thing is, do we get enough renewables? Yeah, there we have also huge numbers, and I already talked a bit about whether this can happen or not. And at the moment, it's all not clear, because, for example, wind power, we're doing much more than before, but not the numbers that would be needed for these projections. No? On the other hand, I also talked about that probably these projections are a little bit too optimistic. We talked about it in terms of industrial relocation. That's one thing, but we also see that this electrification is probably going to be slower than we hoped for. So in Germany, for example, we have the expectation 15 million electric vehicles by 2030. I don't see that. And now we have put duties on Chinese electric vehicles. Then I see even less possible, because I mean these are the cheapest electric vehicles that we can use for this type of transformation. Well, if we ban them, it might be okay from local. No, the Germans even are against it, but there might be some car producers that might find that helpful. But in terms of the transformation challenge, it's potentially not helpful, because it's going to make it more expensive. And so I think we are going to cope with these problems, but my point would be it might take much longer time to do so. So this electrification will happen, but it will take more time, which also means that decarbonization will happen, but it will be very difficult in the time scales that we are politically fixing nowadays, because some of these things, like the infrastructure, I mean, that takes decades, and I simply don't see how we are going to cope with it in 5 years until 2030, or it's going to be a challenge.
Just one thing that probably also is overlooked in when we talk about renewables is that the idea of production is not as reliable as in traditional. Because you have to produce some kind of buffer production just for shortages. So probably in this thing, it would be better to go for a European market, because in this sense we can more or less equalize the different levels of production.
Yes. Yeah, that's one advantage, of course, because then we can balance a bit different situation. I mean, specifically for wind,
yes,
might be different. Also, of course, we have also some renewable production that is independent, variable. I mean, that's not determined simply by sun and wind, like biomass, for example, like hydropower. So tapping more into these potentials is helpful. But then, and that's what I said, I mean, we should develop this infrastructure on a European scale, but it's also not very simple sometimes, I mean, just one example, I mean, for Germany it would be great to have more access to Norwegian markets, because Norwegian has hydropower, so they can really decide when to produce electricity. And of course, it would be great, if they could help us out, in times where our renewables are not delivering. Problem, of course, is that this would lead to increase in electricity price in Norway, because if you're coupling markets, low cost, high cost, afterwards, prices in Germany are lower, but in Norway they are higher. Then, of course, somebody is gaining from that. So the Norwegian electricity producer, they find it great potentially, but the consumers not. So you have all these issues that usually prevent this market integration to happen, because you have all these distribution aspects. And in the end, I mean, in Spain, I mean, impossible for a long time to build, for example, the infrastructure to pass France. Okay, of course, I mean, Germans would be more than happy to have an opportunity to get directly access to a potential green hydrogen from Spain, or electricity from Spain. That might be also a bit decoupled, I mean, you have also here a lot of hydropower potential and so forth. But you need the infrastructure, and that means that you would be cutting off probably some of the possibilities for France nuclear power fleet, developing these type of projects. They want to, because they know that nuclear power will not be usable for many hours in the future, so they need a use, and the idea is to produce then hydrogen and sell us the hydrogen that is produced from the nuclear power plants that have to run all the time, but during the day they will be not used because the renewables are there, sun is there, so you have to, and of course then this is in direct competition with Spain, for example, and so therefore I think there's a good rationale why you don't want to repurpose one of the gas pipelines or whatever for hydrogen, or build new pipelines, to make these markets accessible. And I think we need much more of that, in order to allow for this European problem solving, and I think we are also going to see more of that in the future. But again, it takes a lot of political pressure to overcome these type of considerations.
Another question, I think is
at the end is about us following Aurelio's comment, is about this idea of to produce local or at home. What does home means? Until now, home means your country, but from now, home should mean
I
wider
hope
area.
it would mean Europe, no? In many of these things, because otherwise we are running in a lot of problems. No? And let's say I was testifying in front of the European Parliament 20 years ago, and I asked to stop the German renewable policy and make it European. Okay, I get a lot of problems with the German government at that time, because you have to overcome a bit, these perspectives, for me, I mean, one of the things, if I can say this critically, I was shocked in a way about the status of the renewable build out here in Spain, because given the potentials that are there, it's amazing, no? I mean, what we are doing in Germany, I mean, against all odds, let's say, we are building up these things with this bad natural conditions, no? In a way. This doesn't make sense in a way. And we have to think about how we can develop mutually beneficial schemes, no? That make it clear that you're using really this potential that is here, okay? And you really benefit from it. And I think there are a lot of possibilities to do that. I mean, if you are the low energy hub of Europe, then of course that's what we talked about at the beginning. Then you're going to develop all these different opportunities to tap into value-added generation in different areas. I think, and I think at the moment, I guess these positive chances are not well communicated or visible or whatever. But I think they are there, and on the other side, the Germans, they are going to be in a big disadvantage in this area, and this is not going to go away. It's going to stay there, this disadvantage. So that means, of course, they are going to restructure a bit their economic model, and I think it's inevitable. I mean, it's naturally almost, and we are going to see that. The question is more, how can governments facilitate a bit better these transformations on the one side or on the other side, and how can we use then Europe in order to moderate this a bit, because as I said, I mean, this very often depends then on budgets and possibilities and potentials in these different regions, and I think there Europe would be very helpful.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. I have a question, it's the only question, and a question. From a long-term perspective, what is the role of European countries in the scientific and technical progress? In this moment, China and the United States are in the border of the progress in more advanced technology, like storage, like nuclears, peaks, logistics, etc. And what is the role and the specific technological progress policy? For example, Fraunhofer network, apply a isolated strategy or connect on the rest of the national networks in technological parts. What is the essence?
Yeah, but I think that is related a bit to the question: are we really addressing these problems on a European scale? I mean, if we are doing that on a European scale, I think we are in many of these things on a relatively good situation. Okay, the example we talked a bit about was hydrogen. Okay, so if you think about hydrogen and the hydrogen value chain, I mean, that is clear. It's a European project. And if we would do that on a European scale, I think we are in a very good situation. If you look at patents and where we are standing on this technology, excellent. Okay, but that would also mean that this hydrogen value chain would be located in different parts of Europe, because otherwise it's not going to develop. And so all the Fraunhofers and whatever, I mean, they cannot change the solar radiation in Germany, or the wind speed in Germany, or whatever. So in the end, to really roll out these projects without being too heavy on budgets, you have to go to sites where this is possible. And then, of course, you can learn from. You can also sustain a technology advance. But this means you need European production, and the European production must be then in a place where this is really competitive in a way also. And so if we address this on a European scale, I'm not so pessimistic. But if we do this on a member state level, then I think we are going to fail. And then we are not going to be able to compete. And of course, the US is doing the same. In the US, of course, there are many places with very high electricity prices. Okay, but where are they concentrating? They are concentrated in regions where they have a lot of renewable potential. They're building it around there. And then, of course, you are in places like Texas and other parts where it's really cheap to produce electricity. And we need, I think, to have a bit more of this perspective, pan-European. And then thinking along a value chain, where is the right place for producing, where's the right place in the value chain then to get other parts of the value added, where's the research and so forth, but European-wide, not by member states. If we don't do that, I think then we are in a bad position, because strategically all these other regions are doing that a lot. China, we know, in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, we know, and I think we can do it, because in terms of the money that we are spending, that's not so different. It's just that let's say the joint vision is in Europe not there like it is in the US or in China. It's not a money, I think. It's not really a problem of money or whatever, or technologies. We have all that, but we have not a really European strategic perspective.
Okay, many thanks for your participation here.